Jean-Paul Sartre's analysis of human existence reaches a decisive turning point when another person appears. Up to this point, freedom, consciousness, nothingness, facticity, and the self as a project might seem to concern the individual alone. Sartre insists that this is a mistake. Human existence is never solitary. The presence of others transforms the structure of experience itself. This transformation is not gradual or theoretical. It happens instantly. Sartre names this experience the look. The look is not simply seeing and being seen in the ordinary sense. It is not about eyes, attention, or observation alone. It names the moment when I become aware that I am seen by another consciousness, not as a thing among things, but as someone who can be judged, interpreted, and fixed. Before the look, I exist as a subject absorbed in the world. My consciousness is directed outward toward tasks, objects, and possibilities. I act without reflecting on how I appear. In this state, I experience myself as the source of my actions. The look interrupts this absorption. When I realize that another person is present and aware of me, my experience changes. I become aware of myself as an object. I see myself as I might appear to them. I become something that can be evaluated. This shift is immediate and unsettling. Sartre insists that it does not require explicit judgment. The other does not need to say anything. The mere awareness of being seen is enough to transform experience. This is why Sartre treats shame as philosophically significant. Shame is not primarily about wrongdoing, it is about exposure. It is the feeling of being revealed as something for another person. In shame, I experience myself as vulnerable to interpretation. I recognize that my self-understanding is no longer sovereign. Someone else can see me as clumsy, foolish, threatening, admirable, weak, or contemptible, and I cannot fully control that vision. What matters is not whether their judgment is accurate. What matters is that it is outside my control. This loss of control is the core of the look. Under the look, my freedom feels threatened. I am still free, but my freedom now appears in a world where I can be fixed by another. Sartre insists that this experience reveals a truth about human existence that cannot be accessed alone. I can only experience myself as an object through another consciousness. Without others, I would never encounter myself in this way. The look, therefore, plays a constitutive role in selfhood. It is not an accident of social life. It is a structural feature of being with others. At the same time, the look introduces conflict. As a free consciousness, I resist being reduced to an object. I want to remain the source of my actions, not merely a thing seen from the outside. But I cannot eliminate the other's gaze. Their freedom confronts mine. This confrontation is unavoidable. The other is not a mirror I control. They are another center of consciousness capable of negation and interpretation just as I am. Their look freezes me in ways I did not choose. Sartre insists that this freezing is not metaphorical. Under the look, my possibilities feel narrowed. I experience myself as this body, this gesture, this appearance, rather than as an open project. This is why Sartre rejects idealized accounts of social life that treat recognition as purely mutual or harmonious. Recognition always carries risk. To be recognized is to be seen. To be seen is to be exposed. The look, therefore, produces a fundamental tension. I want recognition from others, but I do not want to be fixed by them. I want to be acknowledged as free, but I cannot control how I am interpreted. This tension explains much of everyday social behavior. People manage impressions, perform roles, and monitor themselves in anticipation of judgment. Sartre sees this not as superficial psychology, but as an existential response to the look. The look does not disappear when others are absent. It becomes internalized. One learns to see oneself as seen. Social norms, expectations, and imagined judgments extend the look beyond immediate presence. This internalization intensifies self-consciousness. One begins to regulate behavior not only in response to actual observers, but to possible ones. Sartre believes much of social identity is formed under this pressure. At this stage, Sartre is not yet making a moral claim. He is describing a structure. The look reveals that selfhood is never fully under one's control. One is always also what one is for others. This does not destroy freedom. It complicates it. Freedom now exists in a field where it is constantly threatened by objectification. One must choose how to respond to being seen, how to interpret judgment, and how to act under exposure. Some responses involve submission. One accepts the role assigned by others. Some involve rebellion. One rejects external definitions aggressively. Some involve performance. One tries to manage how one is seen. None of these responses eliminate the look. They are all ways of living with it. Sartre insists that there is no pre-social self that could escape this condition. To be human is to exist among other freedoms. The look is not a distortion of selfhood. It is part of its structure. By the end of this first part, the basic problem should be clear. The presence of others transforms freedom. It exposes us, fixes us, and threatens our self-definition. And yet we cannot escape others without escaping ourselves. This exposure is only the beginning, because once I recognize that the other can turn me into an object, I am tempted to do the same to them. The struggle does not stop at being seen, it escalates. If the look reveals me as an object in another's world, then a new problem immediately arises. I do not merely experience being seen, I respond to it. And that response, Sartre argues, transforms relations with others into a struggle rather than a harmony. The moment I realize that another consciousness can fix me, judge me, and define me, I face a threat to my freedom. I'm still free, but I am no longer sovereign. I exist in a space where another freedom can interrupt my self-definition. Sartre insists that this threat is not psychological exaggeration, it is structural. Freedom, for him, is the ability to project oneself beyond what one is. The look freezes that projection. It turns me into this body, this gesture, this role, this appearance. Once frozen, I experience myself as reduced. This reduction produces a reflexive response. If the other can reduce me to an object, then I'm tempted to reduce the other in return. I attempt to reclaim my position as subject by turning the other into something fixed, knowable, and manageable. This reciprocal movement is the origin of conflict. Sartre does not describe conflict as a moral failure or a social breakdown. He describes it as the default structure of intersubjective life. Two freedoms encounter one another, and each resists being turned into an object. This resistance appears in many forms. It appears in domination, where one seeks to control the other's actions and interpretations. It appears in submission, where one accepts being defined in exchange for security. It appears in performance, where one attempts to manage how one is seen. It appears in withdrawal, where one limits exposure altogether. None of these strategies eliminate the look. They merely reposition it. Sartre is particularly interested in desire because desire reveals the contradiction at the heart of relations with others. To desire another person is not simply to want their body or their presence. It is to want their freedom, but in a very specific way. One wants the other to choose one freely, but one also wants that choice to be stable, predictable, and reassuring. One wants freedom without unpredictability, recognition without resistance. This desire is impossible to satisfy. If the other truly chooses freely, they may withdraw. If they are controlled, their choice is no longer free. Desire therefore oscillates between domination and dependence, never resting in equilibrium. Sartre insists that this structure is not pathological. It is not a flaw in desire. It is the consequence of encountering another freedom. The same structure appears in social power. Institutions, roles, and hierarchies attempt to stabilize behavior. They convert freedom into function. They promise order by reducing unpredictability. But Sartre argues that freedom never disappears under these structures, it goes underground. People comply, resist, reinterpret, or sabotage. Power does not eliminate freedom, it provokes it. At the same time, those who exercise power are also trapped. To dominate another consciousness is to depend on that consciousness for recognition of one's authority. If obedience is forced, recognition feels hollow. If resistance appears, authority feels threatened. Domination, therefore, fails to resolve the problem it tries to solve. Sartre extends this analysis to everyday social life. Much of what people call identity is shaped under the pressure of the look. People learn to see themselves as others see them, or as they fear being seen. Social norms function as diffused gazes, regulating behavior even in the absence of observers. This internalization of the look produces self-monitoring. One becomes both subject and object to oneself. Sartre believes this split explains why people often feel alienated from their own actions. They act while watching themselves act. This does not make selfhood impossible, it makes it unstable. The self becomes a site of negotiation between how one takes oneself up and how one anticipates being seen. Identity becomes provisional, defensive, and contested. Sartre rejects the idea that mutual recognition resolves this tension once and for all. Even recognition can become another way of fixing the other. To say, "I recognize you," is still to define. For this reason, Sartre denies that social life can achieve final harmony. There is no stable synthesis of freedoms. Relations with others are marked by ongoing tension, misunderstanding, and conflict. This does not mean that cooperation, solidarity, or love are impossible. It means that they are fragile. They exist only so long as neither freedom attempts to solidify the other. The look, therefore, reveals a difficult truth. Freedom is not only threatened by objects and circumstances, it is threatened by other freedoms. But Sartre does not conclude that we should flee others. He concludes that we must abandon illusions about them. Social life is not a refuge from responsibility. It is one of its most demanding arenas. By the end of this analysis, the look appears not as a momentary embarrassment, but as a permanent condition. To exist among others is to risk objectification and to risk objectifying in return. There is no exit from this structure. What remains is the question of how responsibility operates under these conditions, how one can act without denying the freedom of others while preserving one's own. That question cannot be answered yet, but it cannot be avoided either.